Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
82 buildings have been judged unsafe by the government's new fire safety test, in which insulation and cladding of the type fitted to Grenfell Tower were considered together for the first time. The test is more thorough than previous checks, which only tested the cladding. 47 of the buildings are owned or managed by local authorities or housing associations. At least 80 people died in the Grenfell Tower fire in June, and the government today announced an independent review into building regulations and fire safety. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Tom Simons.
Inside the burn hall, this is where the tests have been taking place, upon which the fate of dozens of tower blocks hang. So far, the government's refused to release video of the tests, but like this, it involves setting light to cladding and insulation fitted to a 9-metre wall. This afternoon, the first results showed the same design as Grenfell Tower failed to meet safety standards. The test was stopped after 8 minutes 45 seconds because the fire had reached the top of the test rig. The landlords of 82 buildings, 47 of them social housing, will now have to take urgent action. In Salford, anticipating a test failure, cladding is already being taken down.
The thought of it not being safe and you're sleeping in bed of a night time thinking that that's not safe, do you know, it's bad, isn't it?
Really bad. They should take the lot off. I don't care how much money it costs them. It's not money, it's people's lives at the end of the day.
The new full-scale tests are designed to replicate the way in which Grenfell Tower was refurbished, with a cladding system to improve the insulation and the look of the building. It's the bits that make up this system that are being tested together to see how well they prevent fire spreading. The cladding itself is basically a sandwich, thin sheets of aluminium with plastic as the sandwich filling. And then there's an air gap designed to improve ventilation, but did it fuel the fire? Behind that, thick blocks of foam insulation. How well did they withstand the flames? The tests involve using various brands of cladding and insulation to examine how they perform in a fire. These new tests were ordered because when sections of the cladding were tested on their own, they failed spectacularly. The government hasn't allowed us to film any of those tests. So we obtained a piece of Bond PE, the same cladding used at Grenfell Tower, and asked a company specialising in plastics to show us how it reacts to fire. When the flame was applied to the aluminium sides, no problem. But when the sample is turned so the flame hits the plastic filling in the aluminium sandwich, this is what happens. Several tests showed, in similar temperatures to the Grenfell fire, it drips burning plastic.
If you clad a building in it, you've got a nice fuel source for a flame to propagate on. And if you do a small-scale fire test, it's not necessarily representative of what will happen on a full-scale building.
Which is why the government is now doing full-scale tests. But 3 separate sources with direct knowledge of the type of cladding used at Grenfell Tower have told the BBC it has never been subjected to the full-scale test. Yet it was used on this building after a refurbishment certified as safe by Kensington and Chelsea's building control. So was the cladding installed without the sort of test data inspectors rely on? Official advice on building regulations say if flammable materials are planned for a tall building, the design should be fire tested or a study provided based on test results.
We've arrived at a situation where we have a series of different pieces of legislation, we have a series of different tests which can be applied to that legislation. We've created a system of cracks and shadows that people can either fall into inadvertently or perhaps hide in the shadows on purpose.
Today, a new independent review of fire safety was announced to look into those cracks and shadows.
And Tom's here with me now. So you mentioned there, Tom, right at the end, an independent review. What's that going to consist of?
Well, it's added another review to the list of reviews and inquiries and investigations into this tragedy. It's going to look at the building regulations, this complex set of rules that really are very much being scrutinised, are at the centre of all the concerns now about fire safety. How well have they been enforced? How do they fit in with international standards? But as you can see there, already there are implications for landlords. They are going to have to raid housing budgets, potentially borrow large amounts of money to sort out their own fire safety problems. And they're being told, literally as these test results come in, that they do have to take urgent action to look at their buildings, possibly remove cladding as we saw there. So there's an awful lot going on. And then you've got the police investigation. We heard yesterday that there may be possible investigation there into corporate manslaughter, potentially involving the council and the landlord of the Grenfell Tower. And then finally, the public inquiry. The remit of that public inquiry won't be decided until next month, but that is going to take a long time to complete.
Tom, thank you.
Now, 82 high-rise buildings have failed a new fire safety test in the wake of the Grenfell disaster, which for the first time investigated the combination of cladding and foam insulation. The government said it was now launching an independent review into building regulations and fire safety to help make any necessary improvements as quickly as possible. But the way that fire consumed Grenfell Tower so rapidly raises other questions about the way it was designed and constructed. Our science editor, Tom Clark, has been investigating.
This is the Pendleton estate in Salford. 9 blocks, home to thousands of people, part of a £650 million refurbishment, will now be refurbished again. A total of 82 other blocks across the country, more than half social housing, have the same combination of cladding and insulation materials used here. Today's tests prove they're too flammable to be used together on high-rises. It's something most fire safety experts already knew.
Up on the top, most of the building is covered with this aluminium composite material cladding, which is a sheet of aluminium, 3 millimetres of polythene, and then another sheet of aluminium. And then on the inside of that is the insulation material. Well, the fact that you've got this combination of flammable foam and then you've got this combustible panel on the outside, and worse, you have an air gap between the foam and the panel so that the fire can rise in the air gap and it can burn the sides of the chimney.
The test under construction in these pictures was of a 3-storey mock-up of a building facade. Today's results are from the combination of materials used on Grenfell Tower. Subsequent fire tests will look at mixtures of combustible and non-combustible materials used on high-rises nationwide. The majority of the insulation used on the Pendleton estate is called phenolic foam, a combustible variety that Channel 4 News revealed was also present on Grenfell Tower, but that the government has not included in its tests. Salford Council is awaiting further results and advice before deciding on a solution that would eliminate the risk of a cladding fire like at Grenfell. Today's official test confirmed the role that flammable cladding played in this fire. But Channel 4 News has also been investigating whether there could have been crucial design and construction flaws in Grenfell Tower that allowed a fire which began in a flat on the 4th floor behind me to make its way out of the building and back into other flats with such fatal consequences. We understand that this is the kitchen window of flat 16 where the fire began. It then spread up and around most of the tower.
Oh my days, man.
Amateur footage reportedly filmed just 20 minutes after the cladding fire began shows it running up the concrete column next to flat 16's window. Less than 10 minutes later, it spread to the next column. Could this gap, revealed afterwards clearly visible between each column and the window frames, explain how the cladding fire made its way into people's flats? Based on detailed planning drawings, Channel 4 News previously reported on this apparent gap. With expert help, we've now made a full-scale model of part of a Grenfell window, showing how important it may have been. So there was a decision to move the window that was snug up against the concrete walls of the building out into the cladding system.
Yes.
And what's the effect of that?
There's a gap that's the width of my hand between the new window and the concrete structure that has to be filled with something, filled for environmental reasons, to keep the rain and the wind out, but also for fire, it needs a cavity barrier.
Right, so you get a sense of just how enormous, I can get my whole fist through there. Fireproof stopping is visible in the middle of this picture between insulation panels, so it clearly survived the fire. But building regulations require similar material in gaps around windows. Rubber weatherproofing is visible, but that wouldn't hold back flames. So the decision to move that window, if I'm outside here in the cladding system, which was on fire, yes, what's to stop that fire now getting inside the flat where you're standing?
That's the only thing, stopping the fire coming through that gap.
Kensington Chelsea Council, which refurbished Grenfell Tower, its architect and contractors declined to comment on our findings pending the police investigation. But if true, the absence of fire barriers in a high-rise building in combination with flammable cladding raises the gravest questions about fire and building regulations. Tonight, the Department of Communities announced a formal review of both.
Tom Clark reporting. Well, for the families who escaped the tower, there is still a huge amount of emotional turmoil. Many are still struggling to get the right support. Others are asking to be allowed back in to see the damage for themselves. And now that police say they have enough evidence to consider corporate manslaughter charges, will this bring any kind of closure? Our senior Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel has been talking to one family trying to rebuild their lives after losing everything.
The Alves family flat on the 13th floor, on a night in the weeks before the fire. A dinner laid out for family and friends, a lasting image of the home they had lived in for 19 years. This is now all that's left, ravaged by the fire. Everything they owned, they had collected, they had hoarded, gone. Now they are in hotel bedrooms and living out of suitcases.
I still have in my head the people screaming and begging for help, and we couldn't do nothing. We were on a safe place in our friend's house, watching everything, seeing the people waving and begging for help from the windows, and we couldn't do anything.
6 weeks have passed since their home was destroyed. The council has twice offered them new places, but they weren't seen as a suitable replacement.
I've been looking every day at the building, and it's still, for me, it's still not real. In my mind, I still have my flat the same as I left on that night.
Do you want to go back and see it?
Yes.
Do you?
Yeah. I think if I can do that, is a way of closing that chapter of our lives and start a new life.
At the moment, the tower remains a crime scene. No resident is being allowed back in. Some have been offered to view a 360-degree image shot by police of what remains of their flat. The prospect of returning at some time in the future has not been ruled out. The Alves children were rescued from the flat by their father that night and then watched as events unfolded.
You know, the crackling of the fire with the screaming on top, that was kind of, that's the thing that gets me the most, the sounds. It's almost as if I can still hear them.
How do you deal with that?
Well, for the moment it's talking. So, you know, I talk to my parents, I talk to my friends, and just the act of talking helps me out. And also I've started counselling. Trying to convey what I feel right now about these people is difficult, because what I'm suffering is a fraction of what people who've lost family and closer friends are suffering at the moment. And you know, if I can't convey what I feel right now, I can't imagine the pain that they're going through.
His mother filmed the start of the fire on the 4th floor as she waited for her family to get out.
Well, when my dad came home and switched on the light to wake us up, I was so I woke up and I was annoyed that they were making so much noise, and then he burst the door open and just told me to get up. And then at first I was a bit like, I don't know what to do, what do I grab? Obviously I never thought it would go into my flat, so I grabbed my notes straight away, just, you know, as I was awake and not sleeping, I might as well just revise from the exam I had in the morning. So yeah, I remember everything that happened that night.
The 16-year-old has spent most of her time since in the Grenfell donation and welfare centres.
I just go there, but it doesn't feel like they're helping me. It feels like I'm the one going there and helping other people, because I've never actually been in a situation where I've needed people's help. So I just go, just wander about, just see how everyone else is doing. But it still doesn't feel like I'm the one needing the help, needing the advice.
Do you think you do need help?
I think I do. Maybe long term, but not right now.
Your mum says she would like to go back to the flat to see it. Do you?
Some parts of me say yeah, but then I don't know. If I was to ever go inside the building, we'd have to go through the stairs, I'm guessing, and stories I've heard from other people, I don't know if I'd be able to.
What do you miss most from the flat?
Having a bedroom, my own corner, privacy.
You know, it can range from missing the people to missing my bed to just missing the essence of what it's like to be at home. So now I look back and I remember the days on which I stayed at home and did nothing. And you know, you never truly think about those kind of days until you've lost the ability to experience a day like that.
The Alves bought their flat 12 years ago. Rehousing them has raised different issues to that of tenants. They face having to wait, probably, a lot longer.
The survivors of the Grenfell tragedy talking to Simon Israel.
In the 6 weeks since the fire which turned Grenfell Tower into a tinderbox and killed at least 80 people and injured almost as many again, there have been a variety of tests on the insulation and cladding of other buildings. There have been evacuations from high-rises and remedial work carried out in buildings all over the country. But today, the government revealed that the fire test on exactly the combination used in Grenfell Tower failed spectacularly. Cladding meant to resist fire for 40 minutes in the test burned in just 9 minutes. So many people clearly never had a chance. There are also 82 other buildings with cladding similar to Grenfell. Our policy editor Chris Cook is here. Chris, first of all, we seem to already had a lot of different tests.
That's right, but it's important to understand one big thing. Over the last few weeks, what the government's really been doing isn't actually testing cladding, it's been auditing cladding. So when we hear about hundreds of buildings having failed cladding tests, what that means is that the government has ascertained that those are buildings where they need to have a look and work out whether they might be dangerous. Because the thing to know is, you might have non-combustible material on the side of your building, but it can still be safe if it's used in combination with the right other materials. So what the government has now started to do is it's running 6 huge tests where it mocks up varieties of designs with different combinations of cladding and insulation, and it works out which combinations are safe and which aren't, so we know which buildings and which aren't. And we've started today with a combination used at Grenfell.
Except we thought we knew what happened at Grenfell.
So the importance of doing a test on Grenfell, which obviously wasn't safe, is that we've now ascertained that in these laboratory conditions, it doesn't work. So we know that the design is flawed. It tells us that the 82 other buildings with similar enough designs are also flawed. By the way, 37 of those are privately owned. This isn't just about the public sector. And it also tells us that it's very implausible that a developer could, following the letter of the law, could have actually got this stuff through under the building regulations. We made a film to help you understand a bit more about that fire test.
The only way to test the fire safety of a cladding design properly is to rig up your design, then try to set fire to it. Last week, Newsnight was permitted to film preparations for such a test on cladding like that used at Grenfell Tower. So, plastic foam insulation on the inside, aluminium panels with a plastic core on the outside. We visited before the aluminium panels had been put up. So what's underneath those aluminium panels? Well, first of all, the stuff under the foil here, that is the insulation. In this case, it's so-called PIR insulation. It's a plastic foam. It's the kind of stuff that was actually used at Grenfell. Now, importantly, this stuff here, this yellow stuff, that's a horizontal fire break. It's supposed to stop the fire from going horizontally across a building. These black strips here, those are intumescent vertical fire breaks. What happens with these is that if there is a fire in this bit of insulation, they'll heat up, expand, and they'll stop the fire from going up the building. But the thing is, both the horizontal fire break and the vertical fire break rely on the aluminium cladding on the outside, because otherwise the fire can just go round them. This really is a system that's being tested, not just a group of individual parts. All the parts need to work. So what happened in the test? Well, we weren't allowed anywhere near, and the government hasn't released its footage. So here's a graph showing the temperature measured by one instrument in the cladding as the test wore on. At 3 minutes, the scientists noted
the colour of the panels has changed from white to a dark grey.
At 5 minutes, they observed
burning droplets
falling from the rig. At 7 minutes 15,
sporadic flaming from the top of the rig.
At 8 minutes 45,
flaming several metres beyond the top of the rig. Test terminated.
To pass this test, the rig is supposed to last at least 40 minutes. This result implies the design, not poor installation or bad luck, was more likely to be to blame. These materials didn't meet the required standards for tall buildings. How this design got signed off is a critical question, and not just at Grenfell. Also in the 82 buildings that have been told that this test means their cladding designs are unsafe.
Chris Cook.